Covey has a lot to say about dating and sex, and I'm going to spend some time looking at what he had to say and then adding some of my own insight and in hopes of trying, again, just to challenge your thinking a little bit, for you to be more aware of how you've been conditioned to believe certain things. And as it states here on the slide, I'm not asking you to agree with everything that I'm going to share, but I ask you just to keep an open mind. And again, a paradigm is an example serving as a model. We all have paradigms that guide our behavior, our ways of thinking, how we see things. And again, today, what I hope to do is challenge a little bit about where your paradigms are formed and how accurate they may be. So to lead us into it, what I'd like to have you answer this question rhetorically is what is the one thing that could happen that would make you want to break up instantly with a boyfriend or girlfriend? Something in a relationship that you believe is just unacceptable. Let's let you think about that for a second. And in all honesty, I can predict the answer that the most kids have, or what they would state would cause them to break up, and then that would be cheating. And the reason that I can anticipate that has been the most common answer in the many, many years that I've asked kids that question. However, here's what I'd like to challenge you. If you did write down cheating, or if you can anticipate thinking about, all right, why would somebody write that answer? My question to you is if it's a big enough deal to break up over, why is that there are so many people who continue dating a person who has cheated on them? And I'd like you to think about that. And while you do, I would just, again, if we were together in a large class, I would ask students, I would ask them, how many of you know somebody that's been cheated on? And traditionally, the most of the hands go up in the class. And so cheating is an acceptable behavior. And what I mean by that is that if cheating was not at some level acceptable, then people would not be willing to do it because they know that the consequence of that behavior would be pretty severe. And so now, again, I would follow up with a question that asks this: how many of you know somebody that's been cheated on that continues on in that relationship? And again, if we were in a class, many, many hands would go up. And so I would again say, is that a core conviction? All right. Or is it a private conviction? Meaning that, I would probably break up with somebody, but the circumstances may dictate something else? Or is it a public conviction that you just say, yeah, cheating is not good, but you really personally don't really have a problem with it? And so again, I'm asking you about your convictions. And to follow up again, just a minute with this, because I'll get some kids that push back a little bit, and that's perfectly fine, to say, well, shouldn't we forgive people? And I would say, absolutely. Forgiveness is something that absolutely is part of a relationship. However, I would challenge forgiveness with this point or principle. How long does it take to regain trust? That question, I know, sits with you. I know you have a feeling in your own personal experience or a personal opinion that trust takes a long time to develop. And I would ask you to consider this: is it okay to have somebody back in your life that's broken your trust? And I would say yes, but only after a certain amount of time that they have proved again to be trustworthy. Now, it's been my experience in most high school relationships where cheating has taken place is that people don't make those people earn trust over time. They kind of let them right back into their lives, and then they get upset when they prove again not to be trustworthy. And so again, I'm going to ask you to think carefully about those answers and what you stand for. All right. and again, I love this saying, what you do speaks so loud, I can't hear what you say. So this is not what you say you believe, but how well do your behaviors back up what you say you believe, those core convictions. Now I'm going to ask another question that's going to seem a little bit strange. All right, but what I'm going to ask you is this, is that if you and I were sitting together having an honest conversation, much like I do with my own daughters, I would ask you, what's the number of people that your best friend could have sex with before you started judging them? Now, that's a roundabout way of asking this really blunt question, and that is, when you decide to make a commitment to somebody, how many partners would you want to have had before that person? In other words, where would you be comfortable with that line being, that number being? If your potential future partner asked you, how many people have you been with before you meet? Would you feel tempted to lie? Would you be honest? At what number would you say is okay? I feel comfortable with that. And maybe if it got to be this number, I would start to get concerned that they may be judging me, or that it might cause an issue that might make me uncomfortable. I'm going to come back to this because I think it's an important question. I think it's important for you to think about before we get to that point where you're committing to somebody long term. Again, just want you to read this slide and just kind of contemplate, all right, about what I'm asking here. What I'd like to do is this, is that Covey talks about the weights, all right? What should you wait for, all right? What's it appropriate, or what should you be considering? And I'm not going to cover all of them, but I would like you just to consider this. Covey talks about waiting for the relationship. And one of the things that I have found that is pretty prevalent in our society is that we often think of love and define love in a way that really is more applicable to the word lust. And the reason is this: we talk about falling in love, feeling love, that emotional connection with somebody, and that's by all means a part of it. But the actual, when we start to look at actual love, love is the way that should be defined in a relationship. It is a choice, and I think I can help with a little bit trying to help you understand what I'm speaking of there. First of all, the first time you meet somebody and that you're romantically involved with or interested in, there's absolutely an attraction there, a feeling. Those are called pheromones. And as I state on this slide, the chemical attraction between people is real. And psychologists and biologists have looked at that lasting between the 9 months and 3 years. That chemical attraction eventually will fade. And when that fades, many people become disillusioned with their partners. And what they say is, oh man, why doesn't it feel the same way? Why don't we have that same attraction? Why isn't our relationship as emotional or as exciting as it was when we first met each other? And much of that has to do with this chemical attraction fading. And what happens is that when that chemical attraction fades, we start to see each other and the people that we're in a relationship with for who they really are. And it kind of peels back that idea that, when you first fall in love, you only see the good parts. You only are attracted. Their person is perfect. And then over time, you start to see that fade a little bit. And I want you to understand a little bit why. The other thing in our society is that we use the word love and lust and just being to know the difference. And I really, really like this slide. And I just encourage you to take and look at the two different perspectives versus love and lust. And I think that when you hear love in music, if you hear love in or see love in movies or read about it in books, oftentimes will see it as being possessive and um, much more using somebody for something that you will get from them, and not the unconditional sacrifice that it truly is. And so again, I encourage you to look at the difference here. And I talked much about this. I think that you really learn the meaning of love as a choice when you have a child. All right. Now, I speak about my daughter often, and just to be honest, sometimes, man, my daughter does stuff that does not make me feel good. It does not make me feel like I love her. And if we really thought love as a feeling, it would be as soon as somebody does something that doesn't make me feel like I love them, then we would say, well, we don't love you anymore. And think of how ridiculous that would be if I just told my daughter, if she made me upset, that I would just say, well, I'm done with you. I don't love you anymore. And that, to me, that just sounds ridiculous. And I think you can understand where I'm coming from with that perspective. What I would like you to consider is this, is that, you know what? My daughter does stuff that doesn't make me feel good about her. But at the same time, she's my daughter and I love her. And so I make the choice as a parent to separate my feelings from what my responsibility and what my true emotion is. And that is, love is a choice. I choose to love my daughter even when she does stuff that upsets me, when she doesn't meet my expectations, when she does things that she knows she's not supposed to do. If we took that same perspective into romantic relationships, to say to somebody, you know what, I'm going to choose to love you no matter what I feel, I'm going to make a choice every day to put your needs and your desires equal or ahead of mine. And so I like this statement, again, just to wrap it up. Love is an unconditional commitment. It means it doesn't matter what the circumstances are around it, unconditional. And it's to an imperfect person, right? All of us have our issues. All of us are going to make other people feel different things that are not good, right? But to love somebody isn't just a strong feeling, it's a decision, a judgment, and a promise. And so I would like you to consider that as you move forward in your romantic relationships. One of your assignments I had you do was the character and competence arch, and we just finished that in class. And on the backside, I asked you to share a time where you made a good decision. And this is from a couple of years ago. This isn't from your class, but on the back of one of the character and competence arches, I read this, and I asked the young lady if I could share it with you, and she gave me permission. And her decision was, and you can read it along here with me, is I had a boyfriend for about a year. We were home alone and watching movies, hanging out. We started to get on the subject of sex, and he asked me if I wanted to. I mean, honestly, of course I did. But I knew it was not smart of me to do so. It was against my beliefs and had the potential to hurt me emotionally. I said no and saved myself the guilt and emotional pain because we ended up breaking up 2 months later. Now, this perspective, this story, I think what I'd like to use it to demonstrate is, number one, I love her honesty, and that is when he asked me if I wanted to have sex, she said, I mean, honestly, of course I did. And I love that because sex is a natural expression of love between people. It's a natural human desire. Sex is good, and I don't want to portray it as not. And I love the way, again, that we all have these desires, and we're going to have to learn how to handle those. And those desires are good, and expressed in the correct way can be really fulfilling. I also like what she said here, and I think this is important. That she said, you know what, I thought of the long-term consequences. All right, in that moment, of course, I wanted to have sex, is what she said, but I knew it had the potential to hurt me emotionally. And she saved herself some pain because, as we know, it's here that they broke up 2 months later. And so again, I like the reality of it. I want you to think about it, all right? It provides a look to what every teenager has to make a decision about. Back to the Covey stuff, and I mentioned this to all my classes, is that the statistics show that the number of kids that are sexually active continues to drop. So that idea of everybody doing it is a paradigm, but it's not true. Less than 35% of the sophomores in this building are sexually active. And again, that number keeps dropping. Our data comes from Minnesota School Student Survey. It's a survey that our district takes, and it's a really quality measure of the behaviors. But again, the perception out there is totally different than the reality. And it's much like what we talked about with the kids that do drugs or drink. If they're going to talk about drinking and going to parties and doing that, so it seems like more people are doing that because that's what's being talked about. You know, nobody talks about staying home on the weekend and not doing anything. Well, sex works the same way because of a multitude of different reasons, including peer pressure and fitting in, acceptance. Kids that aren't sexually active, they just don't talk about it. All right, and kids that are sexually active do. Or kids that really want to fit in will lie about their sexual activity to make it seem like they are sexually active, which again distorts the true numbers. Another Covey talks about is the sex drive is so strong you can't control it, and that's really just an excuse not to take responsibilities. It's true. You have hormones, all right? And for young men, testosterone is a very strong hormone, but we have a choice in how we react to them. I would say to all of you in class is that you can control your hormones 99% of the time. You're doing it while you're in school. Why wouldn't you be able to do it when you get sexually excited or stimulated? Again, it's a choice. It's a decision that you're going to have to choose how you want to move forward with that. Safe sex is safe. That whole term, safe sex, is such a, this might seem strong, but it's just a lie. There is no such thing as safe sex. There are things that can reduce your risk, but every sexual activity carries a risks, every one. You can see that 99% effective if used correctly, 82% effective with normal use. What I'm referring to there is condom use. In our society, that idea that, well, just wear a condom and you'll protect yourself. The reality is that it does help protect you, but it does not absolutely protect you. And you can see effect with normal use, 18% of people that use condoms have negative consequences, whether it be an STI or pregnancy risk. And what makes it even worse is that people that believe they're being protected, they really aren't, and therefore they don't go get tested, or they continue to have different partners. And one thing that we're seeing that's just to me is really concerning is that while the number of high school kids who are being sexually active is dropping, the rate of STIs amongst high school kids has gone up the last 2 years. And what I would presume is happening is that kids believe they're being protected. They're not really being protected, and again, they're passing those sexually transmitted infections from one partner to another, maybe even unknowingly. Safe sex is free, no strings attached. And again, let's go back to the perspective I just shared with you about the young lady who said that she could get hurt emotionally. Oftentimes, we just make our sexual decisions based on, will I get pregnant or will I get an STI? Those physical things. But you all are smart enough, and you know there's a social cost, an emotional cost, a spiritual cost to being sexually active. It can't be just physical. We're incapable of removing the rest of our human emotions, our belief systems, our desires for community. All of those things get tied up in our sexual decision making. if we were in class, I'd do a turn and talk here, but I'm just going to ask you again. Um, is that in your head, come up with 3 emotional, 3 social, 3 spiritual costs to being sexually active, just as a reinforcement that it's just not the physical aspect of sex that we're concerned about. I asked you how many partners your future partner could have had sex with before you would be concerned, or how many partners would your friend have before you started to get worried about them. And the reason I asked that question is that any number, it really doesn't matter what the number is. I would like to share something with you, all right? And it has to do with the diagram that Covey includes in his chapter. And what this is a diagram of a high school where psychologists, sociologists went in and started to look at the behaviors of high school kids. And what they found was they did a survey of all the students in a high school that's a little bit smaller than ours. And what they did is they charted the sexual activity. And what I mean by that is this: they brought every single student in the building into an interview and started with the question, have you or are you sexually active? And if the student said no, they recorded that response and said thank you and sent them on their way. If the student said yes, then what they did is then they further asked, all right, so what sexual partners in this building have you had? And they started to chart the interactions. And as you can see here, these interactions caused or created these diagrams. And if you can see here, what I'm going to do is, if you look at these 2 numbers, all right, or actually these 3 in the bottom right-hand corner, where you have a blue dot and a pink dot, or a blue dot and 2 pink dots, a pink dot and 2 blue dots. And what those are, if you can see here, 63 times when a student said, yes, I was sexually active, they gave a name. Maybe it was they were interviewing Mike, and Mike said, yes, I've had sex. And they said, well, Mike, who have you been with? And Mike says, well, I've been with Mary. And then Mary would come in and say, yes, I've been sexually active. And they'd ask her the same question. And she said, I was sexually active with Mike. And those are recorded here. Those are means there's that girl and that boy have been sexually active with each other, but not with anybody else. If we move up here, you can see that 12 times this boy has had sex with 2 different females, and those 2 females had only had sex with that single boy, all right? And so their partners were limited that way. And you can see how these all kind of played out. Now, if you look up here, all right, and this is where I'm asking you to consider, all right here, this young lady has had sex with these 2 boys. If we look right here, if you can see this young lady, she's also only had sex with 2 boys. So they have had the same number of sexual partners. Why that's important is that this young lady's sexual risk is minimal compared to the sexual risk of this woman, simply because of who the boys were. These boys connect this young lady to all of these partners indirectly, while this young lady was only exposed to those 2 boys. So it's not necessarily even just the number of partners you've had, but the sexual history of those partners. And so again, I would like you to consider what number, and maybe not even the number, but what the sexual activity of those partners have been. And what makes it difficult is most kids don't have that conversation in advance. They don't talk about how many sexual partners they've had prior to making that decision. And so they find themselves in a situation that they never intended to be. And so let me close this out with this, and that is, we all have a sexual history. It's being written for you now. It's going to continue to be written throughout your life. And so I'm going to ask you, what will your story be? All right? What are you going to be able to share about your sexual history with people without being embarrassed about it? What are you going to be able to share with your children when they ask you about what you did when you were their age? Will you be able to be honest? Will you be able to be open, or will you feel that pressure to lie, or maybe not have them experience things the same way you did? I love this closing word of advice, in that I would hope that you would never trade temporary pleasure for permanent regret.